Chris. This is Derek Lapointe. I just want to test audio when you get a chance. Matt, Steve, can you hear me? Thank you.
Yeah, can you hear me, Derek?
Loud and clear.
Yep, I can.
Well, actually, Derek is clearer than Matt, but
I've got a little background noise. I can't do it.
I'm down in Florida on vacation, so.
I'm in Phoenix.
Are you?
see, I just thought you were embarrassed, and now I recognize that as sunburn.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Steve, you always have those cool background, no snow, green trees. So, you know, we can't figure that out. So we had to go to the green trees.
I thought about just sitting outside and doing it.
I had two students in the fall who were in a meeting, and it was very clear they were not in Minnesota because we had snow on the ground, and they had green trees living behind them. You know, it wasn't a background. And it turned out they were both in Florida, and they didn't know that they were both in Florida, and they were in the same class. And so it was like, you know. So yeah, it was interesting. But yeah, the palm trees was a dead giveaway that they were not in Minnesota. Which is one of the benefits of new implementation of technology that we always had, but we just never really implemented.
Okay, I think we're going to get started. It is 5:30 on March 4th, 2021. So good evening, everyone. From those watching from home, I am not wearing a mask because it makes it easier for me to talk into the microphone, and the nearest person to me is about 20 feet away. So I think we're socially distancing well here. So good evening, everyone. I am Mayor Shelley Carlson. The Moorhead City Council is holding its regularly scheduled meeting using virtual meeting technology under an emergency declaration due to COVID-19. I'm in the City Council chambers with the City Manager, City Attorney, City Clerk, and a few other staff members. Council members are attending remotely, with the exception of Council Member Larry Seljevold. Any public comment received prior to this meeting will be read as part of the record during the applicable agenda item. The public may participate during the meeting by calling 218-299-5001. Public input will be taken by a staff member and provided to me to be read during the meeting. Or you may request that your call be bridged to the virtual WebEx meeting and speak directly during our public hearings or citizens addressing the council agenda item. Again, the public comment line is 218-299-5001. If there is no answer, please leave your message and call a back number. So, Madam Clerk, could I get a roll call, please?
Shelley Dahlquist. Here.
Matthew Gilbertson,
Here.
Laura Caroon,
Here.
Deb White, Deb White, Larry Selgervold, Chuck Hendrickson,
Here.
Steve Lindos,
Here.
and Mayor Shelley Carlson. Here. All right, if we can stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Okay. City Manager Molly, are there any agenda amendments? Okay, thank you very much. And moving on to number 4, consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moves, Chuck.
Second by Steve Lindos.
Okay, could we get a roll call, please? Dahlquist,
Yes.
Gilbertson,
Aye.
Caroon,
Yes.
Selgervold, Hendrickson,
Yes.
Lindos.
Yes.
Okay, consent agenda passes. Moving on to number 5, recognitions and presentations. I will be reading a proclamation for Women's History Month. And also, it's important to note, actually, Councilmember Selgervold was aware of this and brought it to our attention over a month ago, that it is also International Women's Day, and the theme for International Women's Day is Choose to Challenge. Challenged world is an alert world, and from challenge comes change, and we have a lot of change, really good change happening in the city of Moorhead. So let's all hashtag choose to challenge. So whereas America has been built, shaped, and settled by many women and girls whose vision, grit, and bravery contributes largely to the legacy of America, and whereas throughout history, women and girls have an extraordinary legacy of resilience, compassion, faith, vision, and strength, often in the face of hardship and discrimination, and whereas courageous women have raised families, won the right to vote, taken a stand against injustice, shattered countless barriers, and inspired positive growth in the communities around them and the whole world. And whereas women of every race, color, and creed have fought heroically on all fronts during wars, the Great Depression, civil rights movements, and much more as wives, mothers, students, educators, doctors, nurses, researchers, farmers, caregivers, community representatives, customer service workers, professionals, and essential workers. And whereas during Women's History Month, we honor the work, vision, and accomplishments of women who have made and are still making history today, including those contributions that have not been recognized or celebrated, and those women who, often unbeknownst to them, are shaping our country and society into something beautiful and great through their work, everyday work, words, and actions. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed that I, Shelley Carlson, do recognize March 2021 as Women's History Month. So thank you, Councilmember Selgervold, for bringing that forward. And moving on to the next presentation, we are going to be getting a public health update on tobacco use in Minnesota from Jason McCoy and Rory Beal from Clay County. And after that, we will allow approximately 5 to 7 minutes for Q&A. Eve, they are on WebEx.
Thank you. Yes, I am here. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, we got nods. Okay. I apologize, Rory. As a track coach, is doing his thing, and he got parent-teacher night tonight, I guess. So he sends his thanks for having us in, and he asked that I go ahead and give the presentation. So I'm going to try to be quick. I've spoke to all of you, and I appreciate the time you've given me for a larger presentation. I was asked to mention if there's anyone in the audience or anyone that listens to this in the future that would like to hear a more in-depth presentation, I have my email address and phone number at the last slide. So with that said, I'm going to share my screen and get going here. Okay. Can everybody see this okay? All right. So I'm going to launch as we talk about public health update on tobacco use here in Minnesota, and mention right away that nothing we talk about here is related to sacred tobacco. It's public health stance that sacred tobacco is part of Indigenous people's faith and is not addictive or harmful in any way and should not be regulated. Instead, we're talking about commercial tobacco. Commercial tobacco was given formal definition in the federal deeming regulation passed in 2016. This is because all these products are derived from the tobacco plant. And as you can see, we include cigarettes, cigars, smokeless, which is chew and snus, e-cigarettes or vaping as it's called, and hookah. This also includes any products used designed to use these products. And because we'll use the common term flavored tobacco, I just wanted to give it a quick definition that refers to any form of tobacco which has flavor added other than the original tobacco flavor. The tobacco industry is a multi-billion-dollar machine that includes 3 major corporations with many small subsidiaries and offshoots. Few smaller companies exist outside of this umbrella. Collectively, they create product derived from the tobacco plant. Here are a few quotes from the tobacco industry. It's been made very clear that Big Tobacco has always used targeted marketing to youth, Indigenous people, and people of color. This has resulted in escalating numbers of tobacco use. These, on this slide, these numbers are from the MSS, which stands for the Minnesota Student Survey, conducted in our middle and high schools every 2 to 3 years. Smoking rates had fallen to a level where we could see the first smoke-free generation, free from nicotine addiction. Then came vaping, 15,500 flavors to entice our youth back into nicotine's addictive grip. Here you can see from 2017 to 2019, our numbers in middle and high school that nearly doubled. 2020's Minnesota Youth Tobacco Survey just came out last week. And so there was one piece of good news and the rest wasn't as great. So one piece of good news first is that our once in 30-day use, meaning I only use this product one time in the last 30 days, was down from 26% to 24%. Our daily use, though, was up to 33.6%. That's an 18.3% jump since 2017. Also, this was the first survey to actually ask questions designed specifically to showcase the level of addiction that was happening. And what we found was of those youth who are using vaping devices, 70.4% of them show signs of addiction. Now, kill use of vaping, nicotine, and marijuana also rose to 18.2%, which is up from the 11.4% that it was last time. For the first time ever, youth use of menthol cigarettes also surpassed adult menthol smokers. Our adult menthol smoking rate is roughly 22%, and kids smoking menthol are up over 30% at this point in time. It's worth mentioning as well that these are state numbers. Our local numbers here tend to range quite a lot higher. When we come and talk about our local data, we need to talk about our young adults as well. And so these numbers continue into our young adult population. They were the first, these young adults were the first to see vaping in the high school, and they carried this addiction into college or the workplace. In a world that knows smoking is bad for you, how does Big Tobacco keep drawing in these new customers? And as you can see, 22% of Minnesotans 18 to 24% are using vapes. 75% of those never touched another tobacco product. So how do you draw in new customers when these same young people know not to touch other tobacco products? It comes down to marketing. Tobacco to marketing in Minnesota is tracked at $110 million a year. But when we talk about social media marketing, where they're being forced to use their marketing, we must include national marketing campaigns. Here we see $23 million a day. That's nearly $1 million an hour spent to attract youth and keep current smokers coming back for more. Marketing includes aggressive couponing and price reduction campaigns in targeted neighborhoods and through social media for youth. They look something like this. It's no accident that nearly 9 in 10 Black smokers use menthol cigarettes, which are easier to smoke and harder to quit. The tobacco industry strategically and aggressively targeted the community with menthol cigarettes for decades, including placing more advertising in predominantly Black neighborhoods and in publications that are popular with Black audiences, as well as appropriating culture in marketing, including sponsoring events such as jazz and hip-hop festivals. Today, tobacco-related diseases are still the #1 cause of death in the African American community, and that's not a coincidence. For decades, tobacco companies have used predatory practices aimed to push their deadly product on the Black community. That last was a direct quote from Lincoln Mundy. Menthol is not the only way the tobacco industry profiles minority communities. In fact, aggressively targeting groups, especially young people, African Americans, and low-income populations to recruit as replacement smokers, as they're called, for the more than 1,300 who die each day from tobacco use, has long been central to the tobacco industry's playbook. Tobacco companies have strategically marketed to racial and ethnic communities for decades. American Indian and Alaska Natives, the group with the highest smoking rate, are also heavily targeted by tobacco companies through extensive promotions, sponsorships, and advertising campaigns. Internal tobacco industry documents have revealed the industry's interest in Hispanic and Latino communities because they deem these populations, quote, easy to reach and undermarketed. Now, the tobacco industry is even using public health and social justice crisis, which have greater impact on communities of color to promote their products. All of this has resulted in tragic consequences. Vaping-related illness has been increasingly studied and so more recognizable the longer these products have been on the market. The crisis on youth death beginning in 2019 was the public recognizing what research had already shown. Vaping is not safe. Mayo Clinic has already proven that the particulates created by the vaporization process put lungs at more risk than cigarette smoking. Research has continued to roll in showing that due to the cool aerosol mist involved in vaping, a new user can accelerate their intake far faster than one could go with cigarettes. When a person can go from the first drag on a vape to vaping the equivalent of 2 to 6 packs of cigarettes a day in relatively short order, one begins to understand this level of harm. It bears saying that this was not a matter of vaping THC or vaping illegal cartridges. The CDC proved that no one device or liquid was responsible for these injuries and death. Rather, vitamin E acetate was the culprit, which is used in all kinds of vape liquids. This liquid fat, when superheated, creates chemical burns in the lungs of those vaping. These burns force the body to fill the lungs with fluid, as seen in these x-rays. Without intervention, this can lead to death. Intervention has ranged from the very first double lung transplant on a teenager to intubation, coma, and a host of other issues. COVID exposed what research has already shown. Those who smoke and vapor are at a much higher risk of disease. A weakened immune system is like a broken front door. One would expect anything and everything to enter and take up residence. In this case, respiratory disease. As you can see from this slide, smoking and vaping increases the likelihood of infection by over 700%. And then nicotine is one of the 3 most addictive drugs on earth. These products contain addictive levels of nicotine, and vaping has moved to a liquid nicotine. This allows addiction just like smoking, and as we have shown at faster rates. Truly, nicotine salts, as they're called, have created a nicotine race to see who can put the most in their product. The ones who lose that race are our youth. Nicotine harms brain development for youth at a critical time for learning, memory, and attention. Nicotine also primes the brain's pleasure center to accept other future addictions down the road. All of this adds up to a very high cost. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota did a productivity study and discovered that Minnesota loses $7.5 billion in healthcare costs and lost productivity. To make this local, the tax burden per Clay County household due to tobacco is $753. That's including non-smoking homes. For every youth who does not become a lifetime tobacco user, and for every individual who chooses to quit, the entire community reaps a large reward in health, wellness, and yes, even dollars. So I'm not going to talk much about regulation here at all. Nationwide, we have raised the age to purchase tobacco to 21. Minnesota state law follows that as well. And communities are allowed to do further if they choose. This is my presentation. I thank you for having me in, and I will pause here. And if you have any questions, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. Are there any questions? Councilmember Lindas.
Yes, Mr. McCoy, you had the last slide up, and one of that is the Minnesota Tobacco 21 law that was recently passed. And how does the regulations that law implements get implemented? So our state T21 is enforced locally by Moorhead Police Department. And I'm not sure exactly how far you want me to take with that, but right now, one of the important things to note is that in the state bill, the point of emphasis was placed on selling or furnishing the product to an underage user. In place, we actually had the bill remove penalties for possession for underage users, and this was after a lot of research was done around the state, specifically to make sure that our communities of color, our partners, were comfortable with how this was being rolled out. The idea now going forward is that we provide education and restorative measures to youth instead of penalizing them. We have a long history of giving a teenager a $50 fine and sending them on down the road. It's never changed anything. Instead, we can provide education and give them the tools to be able to move forward stronger into our community and into a healthier life. So right now, it would be fair to say that enforcing Minnesota's Tobacco 21 law is up to local municipalities to figure out how to do that.
100% yes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember White.
Thank you, Mayor. I think if you could talk a little bit more about the restorative justice approach, and then in terms of local enforcement, are there anything right now that would make our ability to be in compliance with the new regulation possible?
Sure. So our restorative justice program, I'll speak as best as I can. I'm learning about it as I go. Public health and restorative justice are starting to a partnership through this. So here's what happens. If let's say I'm 20 years old, 18 years old, I get a citation for because I'm vaping. Now I'll point out, first of all, this is never the first thing that's done. I am not being pulled over because I was vaping. I probably was doing something else. Or I'm 15 years old and I'm in the high school and I was caught vaping in the bathroom. And so what happens is my name is forwarded to the Restorative Justice Department, which is lodged in Clay County Attorney's Office. And instead of going to the court, I get recommended, first of all, I receive a letter that says, hey, this class is going on. we would like you to take this class. And if you do take this class and complete it, then your citation will be stricken from the record. And so in that class, the individual is provided with education on what is a vape, what damage is it doing to your body, questions, leading questions like what made you choose to use a nicotine product? Because there's so many different reasons, right? And then the hope is we will lead them to cessation, but cessation is never a forced thing to happen, right? You have to make that actual choice. And so that's the style we use. We're hoping to get back into being able to use things like community circle talk, which has been a powerful tool. Of course, COVID makes it a little hard to get us all together in a circle, and cessation or something like that through a virtual event is a little bit harder to work on, but we're hoping to get there. Now, I mentioned that public health is partnering with restorative justice in that, something that's kind of exciting. I hope I don't get in trouble, so don't nobody tell anybody except that this is recorded. I'm being trained as a cessation officer to be able to provide that in the area. We're doing that. I'm probably going to be taking over these classes so that we can provide the classes from a truly health-minded perspective. And so this is an ongoing process, but what we dearly want to happen is to see our youth actually have the absolute best chance to succeed. We don't want to see them, with marks on their record. We definitely don't want to see them going back into the community confused. In the past, by the time if let's say I was that 15-year-old, by the time I saw somebody, I may have had 4 citations. So that was that part. You had asked the second question. I apologize. We are uniquely suited to follow through with a state bill. Many municipalities in Minnesota don't have a restorative justice program already established, and so they're scrambling for what to do or doing nothing. And so we already have this. We've been ahead of the game for a while now, and because restorative justice doesn't just work for tobacco, right? This works for alcohol, for marijuana, for other drugs, for violence, for traffic violations, for underage individuals. So all of this comes to that basic model of how do we help our youth improve? Does that answer your questions? Yes. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. Are there any other questions before we move on to approval of our minutes? I'm trying to be cognizant of the time since we have a pretty lengthy agenda tonight too. Councilmember Lindas, and I think that will be it.
Thank you. So it sounds to me like our municipality needs to, one, support the Tobacco 21 ordinance. Law that was passed by the state with some kind of ordinance or adjustment. And so what I'd like to do right now is it sounds like there needs to be some conversation and some work done. And so I guess staff needs to be allowed to have direction to be able to work on this. And so I guess what I need to do is ask the council if that's okay to start that work and start that process to work on an ordinance for tobacco regulation.
City Manager Molly, I'm not sure exactly what the procedure is to direct staff from the dais in that manner. Maybe if you could give some guidance here. No, we're having a little bit of technology issues here. I think now Mr. Molly's.
How about that?
There we go.
Good Lord, every button. So, the easiest way to do this now would be by way of a motion, frankly, directing the city manager to do what Councilmember Lindas has indicated.
Councilmember Lindas, do you want to revise your request to a motion to ask staff to look into making a change on or look into revising a statute or a site, an ordinance.
I would like to make that motion that you just eloquently put together.
I'll second this, Chuck.
Okay, any discussion? I see Councilmember Dahlquist's hand is up. Councilmember Dahlquist, did you have a discussion to the resolution?
Yes, I do. I want to remind the council that if it is minorities that are targeted for the product, it's going to be minorities that are going to be facing these punishments, or however you want to describe it. I don't like that. I want it, like Mr. McCoy said, to be educational, but I don't want any punitive or restorative justice or, making it a punishment. I think that defeats the purpose. So I want you to think about that when you come up with whatever motion you want to make, that you remember who's targeted and who's going to be facing the penalties. Thank you.
Councilmember Hendrickson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I second in this motion, but this one's real personal for me. I am in full support of this, and I'm directing staff to come up with an ordinance. My dad died from COPD with foreign materials in his lung, and I saw him suffer for 10 years, and it's heartbreaking. And then my kids who are now in college went through, and they see high school kids vaping all the time. And I don't know if they get sick, but when we get that addiction, you could see from the presentation that addiction rates have gone way up. So I'm in full support of this, having the staff look into this, and I'm in full support of an ordinance for this. So thanks.
Okay, and Councilmember White.
Thank you, Mayor. I do agree with Councilmember Dahlquist, and I think that's why I hope from what we heard from the presentation that would be the focus, that it's more on educational in terms of the user, but also I'm assuming that the ordinance would also address some of the things in terms of supplying it to youth. So looking at how we, look at it from that point of view rather than from the user, but who's supplying this to kids.
And Councilmember Hendrickson, I'm not sure if that's a new hand or an old hand.
I forgot. I'm sorry.
Okay. Seeing no other hands raised, City Clerk, or Madam Clerk, could I get a roll call, please?
Dahlquist?
No.
Gilbertson?
Aye.
Caroon?
Yes.
White?
Yes.
Seldgevold? Hendrickson?
Yes.
Lindos?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes. Okay. Thank you, Mr. McCoy, for your presentation tonight.
Thank you.
Number 6 on the agenda is approval of minutes. Could I get a motion to approve the February 22nd meeting minutes?
So moved.
Second, Deb White.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Could I get a roll call, please?
Gilbertson?
Aye.
Dahlquist?
Yes.
Caroon?
Yes.
Seldgevold?
Aye.
White?
Yes.
Lindos?
Yes.
Hendrickson?
Yes.
Thank you. Do we have any citizens that wish to address the council?
None at this time.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. Moving on to number 8. Number 8A, I should say specifically, there is a resolution to approve appointment of Mayor Pro Tem and mayoral appointments of council members, committees, board, and commissioners. Could I get a motion?
Steve Lindahl so moves.
Dahlquist second.
Lindos and Dahlquist. Okay, Madam Clerk, could I get a roll call, please?
Dahlquist?
Yes.
Gilbertson?
Aye.
Caroon?
Yes.
White,
Yes.
Seldvold,
Aye.
Hendrickson,
Aye.
Hendrickson,
Yes.
and Lindos.
Yes.
Yes, did you get that?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving into public hearing for 10th Avenue North, 15th Street North, and 16th Street North. Just a reminder that this is, this public hearing and also number 10 are hearings to just proceed with improvements. It does not actually establish what an assessment would be, and an assessment hearing would be later this year or possibly even next year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Assistant City Engineer Tom Trowbridge.
Madam Mayor, I just need a
Lindos
motion to
moves to-
open the public hearing.
Thank you, yes. I forgot about that. Could I
Lindos
get a
moves to open
motion
public hearing.
to open the public hearing?
Gilbertson second.
I think it was Lindos and then Gilbertson. Okay, could I get a roll call vote, please?
Dahlquist,
Yes.
Gilbertson,
Aye.
Caroon,
Yes.
White,
Yes.
Seldvold,
Aye.
Hendrickson,
Aye.
Lindos.
Yes.
The hearing is open now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. This is the public hearing for 10th Avenue North, 15th Street North, and 16th Street North. This is engineering project number 21-A2-3. And this project is one of the city's 5-year transportation capital improvement program projects. Got a presentation here. I'll give it a minute to pop up on the screen. And this public hearing is part of the statutory requirements. When we're using special assessments, we have to hold a public hearing prior to awarding the contract. And at that public hearing, the council would, at the close of it, would need to order the improvements before we can award that bid. So the map that's on the screen right now shows the project area. This would be just a little bit east of Asp Elementary School. And it's a combination project. There's several different streets that we're doing. And part of it is getting a mill and overlay, which is where we would grind off the upper surface of pavement and then put down a fresh surface course. And then the other parts are what we would call rehabilitation, where we would fully remove and replace the pavement, but try to preserve the curb and gutter as much as possible. And so it's 10th Avenue North from 14th Street to 17th Street, and then both 15th Street and 16th Street from 8th to 10th Avenue North. These are roads that were initially paved in 1956. Since then, to our knowledge, we haven't done any major work to them. They've been seal coated numerous times. The last time we know of that would have been 2006, 2007. And at the time, the way these roads were constructed, they should have been an existing gravel surface that curb and gutter was added and a layer of bituminous pavement was placed on top of that. When roads are constructed this way, you know, the seal coating kept them in decent condition for a long time, but they're very difficult to do anything more with them. It's hard to do a mill and overlay because there's not enough pavement there to mill off and do an overlay usually. And then when the water mains were replaced on 10th Avenue North and on 16th Street North, there would have been some extensive patching done at that time. But other than that, nothing major. And then there are sidewalks on both sides of all of these streets. And the main issue we would have to address with the current project is that we are required to update to bring things into compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And primarily what we'll have to do there is replace all of the pedestrian ramps. There's a few other minor sidewalk repairs that will also get done. The utilities are generally in good condition. The sanitary sewer we'll eventually reline that as we need to, but we don't have to dig it up. It's a lot more cost effective for us to do a lining on those. There are a couple of brick sewer manholes that we will replace. And then just as we do the final layer of asphalt, we have to adjust the castings, and we'll replace a bunch of castings then. There is a cast iron water main on 15th Street still, and Moorhead Public Service is going to replace that in advance of our project. So that's being financed by Moorhead Public Service separate from our work, so those numbers would not be included in this project. So as I'd mentioned, there's a mill and overlay of part of 10th Avenue North from 15th Street to 17th Street. And so we'll grind off the upper surface of pavement and put down a new layer. And then we'll do some curb and gutter spot repairs where the drainage is most difficult. We'll do some minor curb and gutter replacement. Otherwise, most of the curb and gutter should stay. And with the rehabilitation, it's a similar thing. We're going to avoid removing and replacing most of the curb and gutter, but there will be some areas that we remove and replace. But we will be taking out the entire pavement section then on 10th Avenue from 14th to 15th Street, and then both 15th and 16th Streets from 8th to 10th Avenue. And as I'd mentioned, there will be a pedestrian curb ramp replacement and then just minor sidewalk repairs. And Moorhead Public Service will be replacing about 800 feet of their cast iron water main on 15th Street. And the reason they have to do that is that cast iron, it's 50 plus years old, 60 years old, and it starts to corrode. Our soils are pretty hot for iron pipe, and so once it gets about this age, sometimes it's paper thin in places, and it starts to break, and we don't want that. We don't want them to have to dig up this brand new pavement to make repairs in another year. So this map shows the extents of what I was talking about then. You can see the mill and overlay is highlighted in kind of a yellowish color, and then the rehab is highlighted in a reddish color. So per the city's policy, the way we finance these projects is we use general obligation bonds, and those bonds have to be backed by the use of special assessments. And we have to assess at least 20% of what we bond for in order to issue those bonds. And the rates that the council adopts, and we revisit this every year, the current rates for mill and overlay and rehab haven't been changed since, I think, 2018. So we've used these rates several times already on prior projects, but those rates are set in a way that will generally will generate at least 20% of the project cost. All right, so for this project, there are 61 abutting properties. 8 of those are corner lots that would actually not get any assessment based on our policy. We do a side lot corner lot credit. So if they front on 2 streets, we'll only assess them for their short side. And sometimes that means they don't get assessed with this project. So for example, you can see there's lots that are fronting on 14th Street, but also front on 10th Avenue. Those would be an example of corner lots that most likely aren't getting assessed on this project, but they would get assessed when 14th Street is done. The average assessment out of all of the properties getting assessed is about $3,300. The minimum assessment is $420. That's kind of an outlier. You can barely see it on the map, but there's actually I think it's about an 8-foot strip. I'm not sure the history of why that is, but most of the lots out there are 50-foot or 60-foot lots. So the median assessment of $3,200 is by far the most common assessment on this project. The maximum assessment is $5,756. So as I'd mentioned, the project financing, we have a total of about $175,000 that's proposed to be assessed. We would be issuing a general obligation bond in the amount of $785,000. And as you can see, we're barely assessing over 20% of the amount that we're bonding for. So there's a slight amount of capacity, but very little extra on that. So we sent out an informational letter back in January to solicit some public input on the project, and we had an informational presentation that was posted on the website. As of March 1st, there had been 49 views of that. It generated about a half a dozen phone calls with some questions that were answered. And then prior to tonight's hearing, a mailed notice went out on February 25th that had additional information and specifically identified that special assessments were being considered. And to my knowledge, we've not received any public comments or calls or anything since that for this project. So the schedule for this project, after tonight's hearing, we've been considering this since November when the council ordered the report. And after tonight's hearing, we have already received the bids. And so if the council does decide to proceed with the project, we would ask the council to order the improvements and to award the bid. Construction would be expected to occur generally sometime from May through September. And then the assessment hearing could be held as early as this fall, or it could be held next year. And once they adopt the assessment roll, assessments become payable the year following the adoption of the roll. So they would, if we adopt it in this year, they would become payable beginning next year. So again, as I'd mentioned, after the close of the public hearing, we would ask that you consider ordering the improvements and awarding the bids. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Trowbridge. Let me first ask if there is anybody in the audience or on the phone that would like to speak at this public hearing.
None.
None on the phone, and I do not see anybody in the audience here. Okay, any questions? I can't see the council members or their hands.
I do have my hand up. This is Councilmember Dahlquist.
Okay, Councilmember Dahlquist.
Are we going to put these two projects together before we vote on them? Or do we have to vote on them separately?
We'll have to vote on them separately.
And it's actually best to keep these two separate because they are a little different. The other one, we actually had petitions for them. This one, there were no petitions. It was entirely driven by our pavement management plan. So they are a little bit different because of that.
Okay, then I just want to make a statement. It's for both of these and any kind of project that's coming up. And I do appreciate Mr. Trowbridge and Dr. Zimmerman for doing what you can during the COVID. I know it's very difficult to be able to do anything other than, having a virtual presentation and then having these virtual meetings where people can call in. And it seems to me, since I've been talking with people who have questions about these projects, that once their questions are answered, they're, accepting whatever assessment is coming, and they know that the final assessment isn't going to come for a while, and they won't know for sure how much they're going to have to pay till after the project's completed. So thank you so much for doing what you can, and I can't wait until we can go back to the actual meetings for these assessments so that the people can ask their questions. And like you said, it's things like, will I be able to get my garbage picked up? Will I be able to get into my driveway? And all those kinds of things. It's just until there is a different way to do this, this is the way we have to do it with assessments, and I really do appreciate all you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Dahlquist. Are there any other comments or questions, clarifying questions? Okay, seeing none, could I get a motion to close the public hearing?
Motion to close public hearing by Lindos.
Second. Deb White, second.
I got Lindos and Seljevold. Could I get a roll call, please?
Dahlquist.
Yes.
Gilbertson,
Aye.
Caroon,
Yes.
White,
Yes.
Selchbold,
Aye.
Hendrickson,
Aye.
Lindos.
Yes.
Okay. Now could I get a motion to, motion on item 9A and 9B? I believe we can do both of them together. City Attorney Shockley? Okay, so do I have a motion for 9A and B?
So moved.
Okay, if Seljevold
Second,
moved
Deb White.
and White second, could I get a roll, any other discussion? Roll call, please.
Dahlquist,
Yes.
Gilbertson,
Aye.
Caroon,
Yes.
White,
Yes.
Selchbold,
Aye.
Hendrickson,
Aye.
Lindos.
Yes.
Okay, motion has passed. Now moving into our second public hearing for 2nd Avenue North and 16th Street North. Could I get a motion to open the public hearing?
Lindos moves to open the public hearing.
Caroon, second.
Okay, Lindos and Caroon, could I get a roll call, please?
Gilbertson,
Aye.
Dahlquist,
Yes.
White,
Yes.
Caroon,
Yes.
Selchbold,
Aye.
Lindos,
Yes.
Hendrickson.
Yes.
Okay, hearing is open now to the public. Back to you, Mr. Trowbridge.
All right, thank you. So again, this is a project that started in our 5-year capital improvement plan. It actually, since 2018, it's been in the plan as a proposed project in 2022. However, there is an ongoing development on 16th Street that it made sense to try to coordinate the work with their project, especially since they would like the road to be widened so that there could be diagonal parking on the street. And they provided a petition to that effect last year, and so we advanced the project forward by 1 year based on that. So again, it's 2nd Avenue North from 15th to 16th Street, and 16th Street from 1st Avenue North to 2nd Avenue North. And the map up here shows what they are. The 2nd Avenue North project is proposed as a rehabilitation, and the 16th Street project is proposed as a full reconstruction. Similar to the other projects, it's amazing how many of the city's streets were actually constructed in about 1956, but by our records, there were quite a few of those at that point that were done. And so we are nearing the end of the useful life of those streets. The last known maintenance that we have out there was a seal coat in 1998 on 2nd Avenue North. Other than that, it's just been some street patching, I'm sure, that's happened when things needed to be done. And I know Moorhead Public Service replaced their water main on 2nd Avenue North in the early 2000s, maybe 2001 or 2, something like that. There would have been some patching then. This slide here shows the existing conditions. There are sidewalks out there in some areas, but not all areas. And the ramps, the pedestrian ramps that are there, some of them are not ADA compliant. Along 16th Street North, there were about 20 parking spaces there, parallel parking, 13 on the west side, 7 on the east side. And then there really aren't any sanitary mains out there, but there are mains close by, so the area is serviced from other areas. So like this Vanny development, they connect to a manhole that's in the intersection of 2nd and 16th. And then there's a storm sewer that goes down 2nd Avenue and down 1st Avenue. And then there's a water main down 2nd Avenue, but not down 16th Street. And one other thing to point out is that the street grades out there, it was fairly common back then that we have a lot of streets that have a street grade that's 0.28%. So that's a very flat grade. Basically, you're talking about 3 or 4 inches in 100 feet. So it's pretty minimal, and our normal minimum design standard is about 0.5%. So even that at only about 6 inches in 100 feet is not a lot, but it's what we have to deal with. So 16th Street is proposed for reconstruction, and we're going to remove and replace all the curb and gutter. The benefit of reconstruction, there's two things. One, that we're being asked to widen the road, and the only way to widen the road then is to remove and replace the curb and gutter. The additional benefit of that is we can increase the street grades a little bit and get some better drainage out there. And by widening the road, we're able to add diagonal parking. And so where there were 13 spaces, there will now be 25. And so that information was provided to the Vanny development along with our estimated cost, and they based their petition on that. And then with 2nd Avenue North, the curb and gutter that's there will remain. We're going to fully remove and replace the pavement, and we'll do whatever ADA upgrades are needed. So again, per the special assessment policy, and these rates haven't changed for a couple of years now, the local rehabilitation rate is $61 per adjusted front foot, and the local reconstruction rate is $105 per adjusted front foot. So in this case, I could show a map that shows what all the proposed assessments are because we only had 6 properties. It's fairly small, and one of the reasons I wanted this on the map was when we start doing reconstructions, we know that they generate a little more attention, and I'm kind of trying to highlight that here. The project has a total of 6 properties that abut. One of them is a corner lot that gets the corner lot credit, and the other corner lot that fronts on 15th Street, we are proposing to assess with this project. They would not get assessed when 15th Street happens. Their assessment is the same as if we did 15th Street, we're only assessing the frontage that fronts on 15th Street. So if you can tell if it's a $61 per foot, they're only being assessed for 50 feet, even though 150 feet fronts on 2nd Avenue. And we're proposing this because their address and the house is all oriented towards 2nd Avenue. So just wanted to point that out. It looks a little weird that they're a corner lot and getting assessed on this one, but when we do 15th Street, they would not be assessed. And 15th Street is proposed to be done in 2022. So one way or another, they have a project that is planned in the near future. And then the properties that front on 16th Street, they've got the larger assessments that are proposed based on the $105 a foot rate. And the Vanny site also, they petitioned for the widening cost, which adds $63,000 to their assessment. So the project, as the mailing went out, actually, the mailing had a higher total project cost. This is based on the actual bids, okay, because we received the bids after sending the mailing, but before tonight's hearing. And so the total project cost based on the bids is about $410,000. We're assessing, just per the front footage policy, $75,000. And then there's an additional $63,000 that was petitioned. This slide that's on the screen is different than what was in your packet, and that's because based on the comments we received, we wanted to show a little more about what the actual project costs are and how it's being funded. If you look at the percentage of the bond, if we didn't have the petition from the Vanny site, we would actually be assessing a little less than 20% of our project cost, which would mean we'd have a very tight project budget. It would be very difficult to fund the project as currently proposed. All right, now based on the comments, we also looked at those 2 properties on the east side of 16th Street. You know, their concern that they raised was, well, this is all being driven by just the property on the other side of the street. We don't really need the project. And our answer to that is a project is still needed. The road does need work done. However, it's a reasonable question that maybe the appropriate project for them would have been a rehab instead of a reconstruct, were it not for the need to reconstruct the road to widen it. So this is something you don't actually have to decide tonight, because tonight's decision is whether or not to proceed with the project. However, when it's time to do the public hearing for the special assessments, we should know which way we want to go with this. If we wanted to do the rehab rate, and this slide and the next one I've added to the project, to the agenda for tonight, so you can see what it is. If you'll notice, those two properties on the east side, their assessments were about 40% higher before. One was about 17,000, now it's 10,000. The other one was about 13,000, now it's 8,000. The total assessments would drop from 138,000 down to $125,000 if we do that. And you can see the percentages, what happens to that. The city share would go up slightly in exchange for those other special assessments going down slightly. And realistically, we probably would have been close to 20% assessed if it had been just done as a full rehab. But because we're reconstructing and then assessing partially as a rehab, that percentage of the bond actually drops to about 15% for this one. But that's because, you know, we're considering on those properties on the east side, assessing them just a rehab rate, even though we're still reconstructing the road. So if the council does decide to order these improvements and proceed, we'd ask you to order the improvements after tonight's hearing and award the bids. Construction would happen from May through September. And then the assessment hearing, again, it could be held this fall or possibly next year sometime, depending on when we want to do that hearing. And then the assessments would kick in the year following that, is when people would have to start paying the specials. So again, tonight we're holding the public hearing. So far, we have heard from those two property owners on the east side of 16th Street that had concerns about just whether the project really was necessary or at the scope of what we're doing. And those are the only comments that we've received so far. And then, so again, following the close of the public hearing, we'd ask that you consider ordering the improvements and awarding the bids. Do you have any questions?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Trowbridge. Is there anyone in the audience or on the phone that would like to speak?
Mayor, we do have a caller, Chris Scherzneck. I apologize for the name.
Okay. Mr. Chris, I'm not going to even try to say your name, sir, because I don't want to mispronounce it. So you can go ahead. And if you could please state your name and address for the council, that'd be great.
Okay, the address is 2610, no, I'm sorry, it's the wrong address. 128 16th Street, North Moorhead. So it's one of the properties located on the east side of 16th Street that you're talking about. And my only concern is that you know, going ahead with the resurfacing of the road is perfectly fine, but we just want to make sure that we can be billed at the lesser rate at 61, I think it was a foot, instead of the whole entire reconstruction cost that you're originally proposing in your first letter to us. That was my biggest concern.
Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Trowbridge, were you able to comprehend all of that? It was a little bit hard to hear you, sir, but I think we got the majority of it. Okay. Mr. Trowbridge?
Yeah, I think just as a clarification, are you talking about between 1st and 2nd Avenue North? Or are you talking between 8th and 10th?
No, between 1st and 2nd Avenue
okay.
North.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other callers, Madam Clerk?
None.
Okay, thank you. And I don't see anybody else in the audience. I know that we have council members that have their hands up, but I was corrected in how I was doing the public hearing, so you will have an opportunity to hear. I do need to close the public hearing, and then we will do a motion on this item, and then you will be able to do Q&A and have discussion. So could I get a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved, Deb White.
Gilbertson, second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Could I get a roll call, please?
Dahlquist,
Yes.
Gilbertson,
Aye.
Caroon,
Yes.
White,
Yes.
Seldgevold,
Aye.
Hendrickson,
Aye.
Lindos.
Yes.
Okay, the portion of the public hearing has been closed. And then if I could get a motion for 10, could we do A, B, and C together, City Attorney Shockley? Okay, so if I can get a motion for A, B, and C, and then after we do the roll call vote, then we will have discussion and Q&A, and I will call on the council members who have their hand raised.
I move to approve all three. Deb White.
Linda seconds.
Okay, could I get a roll call?
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
you may want to wait for discussion and then call the roll, because once you call the roll, the motion is either passes or fails.
Thank you, yes.
Thank you.
So I'm going to call on Councilmember Gilbertson, who has his hand up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Tom. So let's just add another question. Are we voting, if we do A, B, and C, is that approving the first and the 16th Street project?
Yeah, yes.
First Avenue and Second Avenue?
Yeah, it'd be the 2nd Avenue and 16th Street North, yes.
Okay, well, before that then, so the two properties on the east, Tom, would they be, they're both corner lots, right? The one place says First Avenue and then Larry says Second Avenue?
Yes, they both are corner lots. The one that's on the corner of First Avenue and 16th Street was not assessed when First Avenue was mill and overlaid, and their driveway goes to 16th. So it's logical that this is the project that we would assess them on. And the property that's on 2nd Avenue and 16th Street, they front on both roads, but their driveways, they have two driveways, both of them go to 16th Street. And so it's, yeah, that's, our proposal is that they're assessed as part of this project.
Okay, that makes sense. And then they'll have access while 16th Street is being redone then, if they both have driveways on 16th Street?
Yes, yeah, we've reached out to them both just to make sure that they understand what our plan is for how we'll maintain access to them during construction.
Okay, well, I appreciate the extra effort to keep them informed. Yeah, I think, well, before you were talking rehab versus a complete rebuild, I don't think they should be billed for the rebuild prices on the 105. So when I redid, I was doing the math as you were talking about it. So if we're going to approve it, I'd be in favor of, who would pay the difference then? Will the city cover that cost?
Yeah, the city share of the total project cost goes up about $13,000 with that. And it still works. We're still assessing about 30% of the project cost because of that petition we have for the work on the other side. So we're still able to issue the bond for that.
Okay, I think that's in the best interest of both the Vanya projects, so we're not putting more cost onto them. And, let's face it, streets need to be redone, but it doesn't, those two projects or two businesses on the east side should pay what a normal reconstruction rehab would be instead of a complete widening, covering being charged for the extra cost because of widening it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gilbertson. Councilmember White.
Thanks, and I'll be brief because I think Councilmember Gilbertson covered a lot of what I wanted to say. Is that I also support that. I think that I appreciated Mr. Trowbridge of, providing us with that additional information. And I know you don't need a decision tonight, but you wanted our input on that, and I would fully support charging them at the rehab rate rather than the reconstruct rate.
Any other questions or comments from the council? Okay, seeing none, if I could get a roll call based on the motion and the second.
And just for clarification, I've got a motion by White, second by Lindos.
Yes.
Go with that. Dahlquist,
Yes.
Gilbertson,
Aye.
Caroon,
Yes.
White,
Yes.
Seljavold,
Aye.
Hendrickson,
Aye.
Lindos.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes. Thank you. Moving down to number 12, actions related to the 8th Street redevelopment tax increment financing. And I will turn this over to Mr. LaPointe.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. I got a exciting project here before you tonight. So we have kind of the final wrap up for the 8th Street redevelopment TIF project that Enclave is proposing. So Enclave Company is looking to construct a multifamily housing project, and I will start by saying we are just looking at the multifamily housing project tonight. The commercial project we will be bringing forward at a later date. But we are looking to bring forward this housing project. This is a 130 unit multifamily residential building with underground parking, surface parking, a lot of amenities along the outside and inside of the building as well. You may recall on October 26th, 2020, we had the first step in the approval process where we brought the TIF plan forward, the tax increment financing plan forward. That was unanimously approved by the EDA, the council, and the planning commission. We also notified the school board and the county at that time as well. Tonight, we kind of have a fistful of things to go through. We obviously have the master development agreement. That is the agreement that outlines the details of the actual project itself. And then we have the purchase agreement, which is a small city-owned triangle lot on the south end of this parcel. We have a stormwater maintenance agreement that our city departments have gone through and kind of finalized. We have a conditional use permit that is for height, and I'll get into that in a little bit. And then we have a minor subdivision. So I'll kind of go through each element in brief, and then we'll go into discussion from there. I should note too that Brian Bachman from Enclave is on the call tonight. So if you do have any specific questions for the developer, Brian is on the line tonight. For the development agreement itself, and hopefully you can follow along in the communication here, just a few things that we wanted to pull out. Obviously, Enclave is the development project lead. They are establishing an LLC to kind of operate this project, and that's Emery Apartments. So the project itself is referred to as Emery Apartments. Again, the project is looking to construct a new multifamily 130 unit complex with underground parking, garages, surface parking, and a private park area. The minimum investment is $20 million. As I mentioned in previous meetings, we do have a affordable housing component to this project, and that is required by state statute because of this housing TIF process. In short, there'll be about 52 units of the 130 units that will be restricted to occupants that meet those requirements of affordability. The new term for this project, for the housing piece itself, is up to 16 years. So that will be the term, and that will be to pay for qualified expenses that are outlined by this agreement and the TIF plan. And construction timeline, which I think is great, is hopefully with approvals here tonight, they'll be submitting for permits, and we'll be breaking ground this spring. Secondly is the purchase agreement, and on your packets or in your packets, you'll see that small city-owned triangle lot that's on the south side of 30th Avenue South. This is a city-owned parcel that was originally kind of used as a driveway extension for the commercial components. Because those two properties are now tied with the same owner, we felt there was no issues with selling that parcel to Enclave. So we do have a purchase agreement for $1 a square foot, and the proposed sale will be totaling $2,600 intake. The stormwater agreement, that's letter C, is basically outlining that the requirements of stormwater maintenance is with the property owner. So that's pretty commonplace in what we're going forward with. Letter D is a conditional use permit. This went through the Planning Commission and was unanimously approved on March 3rd. There is a variance because of some water table issues on the site. They did have to kind of maneuver some of the underground parking. So they did extend that building up in height, which makes it a 61-foot height, 5-story building. And that was not allowable with the new zoning that was established a couple months back. So we ended up going through the Planning Commission process. We had notices that went out. I will note that we did receive an email from the owners of Muscatel. I did reach out to those individuals. I had not heard back from them, but I think some conversations happened internally with Muscatel, and I think after learning more about the project, there doesn't seem to be an issue with the proposal in front of us here tonight. And then lastly, because of the TIF kind of plan and the legal statutory requirements, a minor subdivision was created that basically creates a new lot for this parcel in itself. I should note that some of these items would have been traditionally on consent agenda here tonight, but because it's such a large project and a lot of items, we thought it was best to just walk through all of them here tonight. Overall, a great project for our city. I think it meets a lot of the goals and objectives, especially from the affordable housing component. We also believe that our intentions early on was hoping that we'd be able to bring forward the commercial and the housing project all at the same time. Obviously, as we all are experienced through COVID, the retail game is a ever-changing one. And I think some of the details are really getting worked out with Enclave, and we do feel confident that they will be bringing forward a commercial project. Our goal is early next week to hit the ground running with that one again and bringing something forward. So we do feel very confident that that project is moving forward. Enclave is the owner of that property, and we are very excited to see this half of the project get its start here in Moorhead. So with that, we'll pause. We do have Brian Bachman on the line from Enclave, and we'd be happy to answer any of the questions that the council may have. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Lapointe. Any comments or questions from the council? Councilmember White.
Just one quick question, because I love this project. But I think, haven't you increased the percent of housing that's set aside for affordable housing since we looked at it before? So I think 40% is even higher than what we initially looked at.
Yeah, at first we had done a 50%, 20% of our units. Now we are doing 40% of our units.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Gilbertson.
I was going to figure out how to raise my hand with this thing. So I'm just going to do it all the time now. No, thanks. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Derek and Brian. I couldn't quite tell from the drawing, is obviously the Dairy Queen stand, the bank stand, the new bar, is all the existing commercial stand, and then are you also adding a couple? Is there a building to the south and then in the center of the parking lot?
Yeah, that's part of the reason we broke the two projects up into apartments and the retail side, was because the retail side is still kind of a moving target at the moment. We've had some discussions with several retailers. We're working with CVS, who is currently in the building, on what their long-term desire is for things like a drive-through and things like that. So yeah, as of now, the plan is for Dairy Queen and the bank to remain, and for us just to kind of work off of what we already own over there. But like I said, that's still kind of a work in progress as to whether or not all of the existing building, more specifically the really large box on the south side. There's versions of our plan where that stays. There's versions of our plan where that goes and is replaced by a couple of different options. We're kind of early in that process, just finishing the design process for several different versions of it, so that we can give that to our marketing team and our leasing team to try to kind of finalize what we hope to be able to do over on the retail side.
And I will note too, and I appreciate the comment, Councilmember Gilbertson, we are just looking tonight here at the housing aspect, so we will be finalizing some of that details. We wanted to put the full scope of that site plan in there so you guys could see it, but as Brian mentioned, we're working closely with them to kind of finalize some of the financial components and the detail of that, and we'd be bringing that forward at a later meeting as well.
Thank you. Councilmember Dahlquist.
Yes, thank you, Derek and Brian and Mayor. I know you said you don't have anything finalized yet, and I thank you so much for getting more affordable housing. I really, it's just makes my heart feel so good. But I have a question about, I know it was in there about the parking garage, and because of the water table, you couldn't have it underground. Is this still going to make it qualify for some of the tax deals to give them, you know, like so many years at a lower tax?
Yeah, I'll maybe speak to that. I don't know, Brian, you want to touch on the water table issue, but yes, there are certain qualified expenses that are outlined. We don't have on the call today, but Baker Tilly and their staff as consultants, they really go through what's eligible and what's not. So we've broken down those financial runs and those details and what's eligible, what's not. So yes, we have gone through that due diligence in great detail, as you can imagine, with the amount of financial and legal components that are in this kind of incentive and project. So I don't know, Brian, do you want to quickly mention anything about the water table up there?
Sure. Yeah. What we found was that the water table is at 7 feet there. So anything that we tried to do underground was going to get, was going to require a lot more work than was necessary. So basically what we did is we took the underground parking structure and we just brought everything up a story. So there's still a precast concrete level that would have normally been underground. Now it's just on the main floor. So instead of underground parking, now there's main floor parking. We have some of our lobby still on the main floor, but most of our amenities are now on the second floor. So we've had to kind of reconfigure the building a little bit, but it was just, there was no way we were going to ever be able to keep the parking structure dry with the way the water table was there.
Wonderful.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure that you can take advantage of every cut and benefit.
Appreciate that.
Okay. Councilmember Kroon and then Councilmember Hendrickson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just have a question, kind of building off of Councilmember Dahlquist's question, as far as having to change because of the water table. So what is the purpose of the original height limitations for that zone?
Well, I can maybe speak to it briefly. So it actually was zoned a commercial corridor early on. We brought that through the Planning Commission because we felt that the new zoning district that we had placed on this met a lot more flexibility in the long term as far as housing and commercial uses in the long term. So that zoning change brought forward a number of months back now in October or December, might have been November actually. So we did do that zoning change. The commercial zoning district that was initially there would have allowed this type of height. But since we kind of went to this neighborhood kind of mixed use kind of zoning district, it had a height limitation. And as Brian mentioned, it would have met those eligibilities from a height standpoint if the parking could have been underground completely. And so everything was kind of running along pretty smoothly. And then that water table issue came up and we had to raise everything up significantly. So we felt in the Planning Commission that brought it forward at that point in time, felt that it was an acceptable change because it would have been allowed in the prior use that was more generalized commercial at that point in time. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Point.
You bet.
Councilmember Hendrickson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Love the project. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Derek, for getting this going. It'll be a good thing for Moorhead, especially if you exit off exit 1 and you see that building. Just have a quick question for you. I know you haven't, I don't know if you mentioned this or not, or planning, do you know what the time frame for the commercial portion is? Because I get asked about that building quite a bit, or you couldn't really give me one.
The goal is to finalize a plan for that here probably within the next 30 to 60 days. We do have some people that we're working with that have rather significant interest. Mr. Lapointe and Mr. Molly and the whole city staff has been so amazingly helpful to us in trying to get this whole project with 100 moving pieces to work. And so obviously, as Derek had said, the world post-COVID is certainly difficult on retail, and I say post-COVID in sheer hopes that maybe we are finally almost done with this. Retail pre-COVID was hardly a happy and going concern as when it comes to brick and mortar. COVID has taken a real toll on a lot of brick and mortar small type businesses. And even large businesses. So it has certainly changed fundamentally the way we shopped. The question is, how long does that last? Do we all go back because we're free from our homes and we're going to happily go, barnstorm the mall? Or are we, going to keep ordering online because that's just simpler to have it show up on my front step? Restaurants are going to be a really interesting dichotomy to look at as again as we emerge from this. So the rates that we've been able to look at and everything else have really been affected by this, because a lot of folks, if they have survived, are not always in the best of shape. So trying to come up with a good roster over there so that we can bring some new things into that area, that's really kind of been our stated goal. Working with, CVS has been trying to get them to pay attention during this COVID time has been difficult because they've just been hanging on like everybody else trying to get through it. So no, it's the city staff and the city has been super in trying to help us do this. Our goal was to try to do this all as one big project wrapped up in a bow where we would be able to say, here's exactly everything that we're doing. And what we really quickly found towards the end of last year was that the apartments were moving. It was really easy for us to figure out how we wanted to do it, what we needed to do it, because we were the developer, we were the contractor, we were the owner, we were the manager. We really managed all parts of that project, so we could keep that one moving along pretty quickly. The retail side just required so many other people that move on their own schedules, not on ours, made that a little bit tough. So I'd like to say that we're, like I said, we've had some real good conversations with some folks, and I think we're getting closer. And it seems like the excitement from the retail world, not just on this project, but on some of the other projects that we're doing, seems to be getting a little bit of energy to it, as opposed to most people when they take a call, it's like, are you interested? Yeah. Call me back in 6 months, or the inevitable first question of, oh, well, when's this going to be done? So we're getting closer. I'd like to see, like I say, I'd like to say that we'll kind of have our plan, and then, like Derek said, we'll start working with the city to kind of iron out how we're going to handle all of that, that side of the finances, and have this back to you guys. I'd like to say this summer.
Don, go ahead, Derek.
Go ahead. I was just going to say in real short, I think maybe speaking for Brian a little bit here too, I think this project as the housing piece, getting it step forward is another reassurance to many of the users that potentially can come in there too. So I think this is a good start in the right direction, as much as the uncertainty is out there. Having a quality project that is going up next door not only helps that commercial corridor that Enclave owns, but up and down that corridor as well. So we're excited that we're getting this first start with the housing project.
Well, and it certainly does help, because when you have, 150 to 200 people now in walkable distance to those retailers, restaurants, and so on, that certainly is going to help. That helps, like Derek said, that certainly helps the big picture of the whole area.
Thank you both. It is an exciting project, and just wonderful. So thank you guys very much.
Thanks.
Okay, Councilmember Seljevold.
Brian, thank you for doing this project. Just a wonderful project. One of the things I'll say was, and I don't know who should hear it properly, but I know those apartment dwellers are going to have a wonderful bike path. It'll go underneath that road to the north of them. And I just want to make sure that somebody hears that they need to go out north of that apartment building to catch a path, and don't make those people go south, and then have to go north to catch that bike path. Make them, somehow the city or whatever, we need to make that bike path connected to your apartment building. So, yep, thank you for doing the project. Great.
Thanks.
And Councilmember Hendrickson, is that an old hand or a new hand? I'm going to go with that must be an old hand. So,
Madam Mayor. Can you hear? I was on mute. I'm sorry. I'd like to make a motion to approve this.
and was that motion for 12A through E, Councilmember Hendrickson?
Yes, please.
Lindas will second that.
Okay, Hendrickson and then Lindas. Any other discussion? Seeing none, could I get a roll call, please?
Dahlquist?
Yes.
Gilbertson? Caroon?
Yes.
White?
Yes.
Seljevold?
Aye.
Hendrickson?
Yes.
Lindas?
Yes.
All right, number 12A through E
Thank you.
passes. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Bachman, for doing this project. We are all very excited, as you can tell, and I really appreciate your shout out to our phenomenal city staff. I concur that I think they are pretty amazing and do a great job. So look forward to.
Yeah, no, they, honestly, without their ability to be creative with this process, to be really honest with you, I think we might have filed this in the life's too short category, because it's just been amazingly complicated, from acquiring the property from 7 different banks to having to go through all of these other hoops and hops. They've been super to work with, and their creativity and excitement for it has been really infectious. So we really appreciate it.
Fantastic. Thank you. We look forward to working with you on even more projects in the future.
Thank you.
All right, going on to number 3 on our agenda item, various actions to support the downtown railroad grade separation project. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Zimmerman. Your microphone's not on.
Where's the button on? I'm with you, Dan.
There you go.
There we go.
I'm sure it was something Mr. Trowbridge did.
It was sabotaged by the assistant city engineer.
Right. Thank
Christina's
you.
going to help pull up a PowerPoint It's been a while since this project has been on the council agenda, and we've piled up quite a few actions for your consideration. I think that just goes to show that a lot of activity has been going on behind the scenes for the last several months. So there's four topics that we'll cover tonight, and Lisa and I will be tag teaming this effort. The first topic is a project status update. From there, we'll move on to property acquisition, talk about a potential build grant application, and then consideration of a contract for some federal relations services. With respect to project status, the preliminary engineering and environmental phase, which was initiated in 2018, is scheduled to be complete middle of this year. The final document will be what's called a categorical exclusion. That's actually good news. That's what would be considered the lowest level of environmental document. Essentially means that there are no significant environmental impacts. That's not to say there are not environmental issues. As we can all expect, there's going to be contaminated soil and things like that to deal with. But mitigation for those issues will, generally speaking, be identified in that document. As I'm sure we're all aware, the capital investment or bonding bill was passed in October. That includes $62 million for this project. Those are trunk highway bonds. Essentially what that means is that MnDOT must be the lead agency for project delivery. MnDOT will be using a construction manager general contractor project delivery method. This is an innovative project delivery method. So using that approach, MnDOT is going to contract with a consultant and separately with a construction contractor. Those two will coordinate with MnDOT and city staff to complete the final design for the project. That approach is really well suited to complex projects like this one. It incorporates contractor perspective in the design process. That allows construction risks to be identified and opportunities to mitigate those risks during design. So ultimately, that's envisioned to save the project not only time, but also cost. When final design concludes, the contractor is provided an opportunity to place a bid for construction. That bid is subject to negotiation and independent validation. If the bid is acceptable, the project moves directly to construction. If the bid is not acceptable, then the project is bid under normal public bidding procedures. So again, a time savings and a potential cost savings. Lastly, by way of project status update, construction is currently anticipated to start in 2024. So the second topic tonight is property acquisition. On the map shown, the city owns all of the parcels that are highlighted in green. Through the preliminary engineering effort, we've identified those parcels that must be acquired in total, meaning the entire parcel plus the improvements. Those are shown in that pinkish color. We do not anticipate those to change at all. So the process to begin acquisition for those parcels can begin immediately and is one of the actions for council consideration tonight. The parcels that are shown in the orangish yellow color and the blue color represent either a partial acquisition or potentially a permanent easement or a temporary easement. Those will be refined during final design, so we're not ready to move forward with those acquisitions yet, and that would become a separate process. So what we're proposing tonight in terms of property acquisition is probably a little bit different than what would normally be done on a MnDOT project. So again, MnDOT is the lead. MnDOT holds the keys to the state funding. They would normally be the agency that would do the property acquisition. We requested that the city be allowed to lead that process. We think it'll be more efficient, and it will allow staff to engage with property owners if the situation arises where the city could provide some incentives or opportunities to those property owners or tenants to relocate within the city. So there's sort of a three-tiered approach that we're using. The first tier is this, that MnDOT will grant the authority for the city to lead the acquisition process through a joint powers agreement. Through that agreement, they still retain all approval authority for things like appraisals and offers and acquisitions, purchase agreements, and so on. But we will lead the acquisition process. MnDOT will reimburse the city for those acquisition services. The second tier would be the city issuing a task order to SRF Consulting Group under the city's master services agreement. So the city would pay SRF for their services, and again, being reimbursed by MnDOT. And then the third tier is really the SRF tier, where they do the work. They do all of the day-to-day activity that's required to acquire these parcels, present all of the appraisals, offers, negotiate settlements, and so on. So they do, again, that day-to-day work, and they become the primary point of contact. This is the same sort of process that we've used on other projects, for example, Southeast Maine. We used it when we did the Sims project in downtown, where we had a consultant with expertise in these federal and state acquisition processes lead the effort. Just to note that all of the owners and tenants on these sites are eligible for more benefits than simply the purchase price to acquire the property. These summaries are included in the council package, so I have no intention of going through this in detail. Just wanted to highlight that all of these additional benefits are available. There is a more detailed document if anyone is interested. We have pre-COVID actually reached out to all of the affected property owners. I think we've met with every one of them, if not met with them, at least have had correspondence with them, phone conversations with them. I don't think there's any great surprise for anyone that's on the list for total acquisition. Again, all of these benefits would be available to displaced owners as well as to tenants. Cost of services for these acquisitions, again, this is just the acquisition services. This is not the acquisition of the properties. That's multi-million dollars, is about $350,000. And that scope is just for the total acquisitions. As we further refine and define the partial acquisitions that are needed, we envision to use the same process that would be employed through an amendment to the joint powers agreement with MnDOT and the task order with SRF. All of the property that's acquired would be done so in the name of the state. We have, for some of these total acquisitions, identified that there will be some developable parcels that remain after the project is completed. We've had conversations with MnDOT about that, and where physically and economically feasible to do so, we'll preserve those remnants for resale for potential redevelopment after the project is completed. Moving on to the third topic. For some council members, this is a pretty familiar topic. We've talked about this on an annual basis. A potential for a federal grant application under what's called the BUILD program. Congress appropriated $1 billion for this program in 2021. One of the few cases where we're way ahead of the game because the notice of funding opportunity has not actually been issued yet. Normally we're talking to you after it's been issued. This program is a competitive nationwide solicitation for projects that have significant local, regional, or national impact. Based on previous solicitations, we expect the program would include grant awards up to $25 million, a requirement for equitable geographic distribution, and that 50% of the grant awards must go to rural, or for projects in rural areas. And interestingly enough, under this program, the city classifies as a rural area, which means that an application would not compete with some of the larger metro areas throughout the country. This is not the first time the city has pursued federal grant programs for underpass projects. The long history is shown there. After each of those, we took advantage of debrief sessions with the US DOT, and after each of those, improved our application documents. Almost all of our recent applications have rated in what's called the highly recommended category, which is the highest of all the rating categories for projects across the country. Unfortunately, though, we're not selected, obviously, for funding. What I can say, or what we can say, that last couple of bullets, past history and experience indicates that this is not entirely a technical grant program, but a federal outreach strategy is really critical to accompanying an application. And that was really confirmed in some of the debriefs that we had with the US DOT staff. So you really need to consider coupling a grant application with a federal relations outreach. We would expect that the maximum build grant award would be $25 million, so something, if we're fortunate enough to receive something, it could likely be somewhat less than that. I think it's best to view this potential application as really a risk and cost management strategy. We're still very early on in the development of this project. We have a project cost estimate, a lot of details yet to be worked out, a lot of potential risks. You know, some obvious risks like things managing quantity of contaminated soils that might be out there. We still will have to have an agreement, actually MnDOT will have to have an agreement in place with BNSF. The terms of that agreement at this point are not known, and the railroad costs are not known with 100% certainty. The ultimate cost for property acquisition has some level of risk in it. Simple way of saying all that is project cost is probably going to change over time as we get through property acquisition and final design. And so a grant award would, number one, ensure that the funding sources that are currently allocated to the project are as robust as they can be. Number two, could be used to fill any gaps that we identify as we go through that final design process. And then lastly, to the extent that we can offset state and local contributions that are committed to the project. So really sort of a risk management strategy for project funding. Should the council wish to proceed with an application, KLJ, our consultant for the preliminary engineering phase, has prepared the previous applications, done a really good job with those. We would issue a task order to them, again, under our master services agreement. The estimated cost for that is a little over $19,000. MnDOT has agreed to reimburse the city for the full cost of that application if the city engages a federal relations consultant to serve that second part, the application to be supplemented with federal relations. And with that, I will turn it over to Lisa. Christina, she has a couple slides left.
Well, thank you, Bob, and thank you, Mayor and Council. We do have an opportunity, a contract before us for federal relations services if the council wishes to pursue that. In both 2019 and 2020, the city worked with a firm called Lockridge Grindal Non, and that company has changed now. Their new name is Primacy Strategy Group, and we have representatives of Primacy Strategies Group with us tonight, I believe, Emily Tranter and Ryan Kelly. And in a few moments, I'll ask them to tell us a little bit about some of the federal opportunities that might be available. In your materials, you see some of the things that PSG can do for the city of Moorhead. We have a very good working relationship with the Minnesota federal delegation, and we have pretty good access to the North Dakota delegation. But one of the things that really has been helpful to us in our outreach has been the connections that PSG has with other states that are impacted by the railroad, and the city, MnDOT, and the members of the Great Northern Coalition that follows the railroad all the way out to the West Coast. We're really impressed with the services of PSG, and they helped to arrange, when we were able to gather, they arranged in-person strategy meetings, and during this past summer, they worked with us to provide virtual meetings with a number of people that were really helpful in providing support for our application. As Bob indicated, we were not ultimately successful, but in those debriefs, they told us our application essentially got an A. And we did not make it all the way, but I think that the decision was based on something other than the technical application. And there are a lot of needs, and to pursue this application, I think really does require that $60. That would be half of the application cost for the build grant that MnDOT would agree to pay. MnDOT is prohibited from participating in federal advocacy expenses by rules that affect the state. And so, but they believe very strongly in that this makes a difference. And so they've agreed to pay the entire cost of the application, the KLJ expenses, if the city of Moorhead agrees to pursue this federal advocacy agreement. The other option that we have for you tonight is a 12-month contract, which would provide us opportunity to go beyond the build grant and look at some of the opportunities for additional resources that we could pursue with federal, with Congress, and get additional funding for other city projects. So in either event, the cost is offset by MnDOT. There's a $1,000 per month difference between option 1 and option 2. And so if Emily and Ryan are on the phone, maybe we could hear from them a little bit about what those opportunities might be so that you can make an informed decision.
Yeah, you bet. Well, thank you for the introduction, and Madam Mayor and City Council folks, thanks for carving out a little bit of time for us to give you an update on the lightning speed, uncharacteristically, that Washington, D.C. is actually moving with. And I think Lisa really did hit it on the head. We are in a very unique time due to circumstances that are coming down the pike. Cycle. And so maybe it's been, so since the last time we were in front of you, we did have a name change, as Lisa pointed out. It's the same great team, only the bench strength has gotten deeper. I'm the president of Primacy Strategy Group, and we merged with our longtime partner, Lockridge Grindal Now, for the federal representation. but we also do work in the 6-state area with state and federal government relations work. So very familiar with the hallways of the Capitol out in Bismarck, as well as Montana, South Dakota, Wisconsin, and Iowa. And it's been our privilege to represent you guys in really enhancing your application and adding some of the political horsepower with the members of Congress that were willing to pitch in on the bill grant process. In addition to that, as Lisa pointed out, there's a lot more opportunities that are coming out of the federal government. No value judgment, but it seems like the federal government is on pace about every 6 to 9 months to be writing out about $2 trillion worth of checks. And a large chunk of that is going to be open to cities and counties. As many of you are probably aware, we've got the current COVID package of $1.9 trillion that will be passed, cautiously optimistic, but shall be passed, I think, here in the House after the Senate tinkered with it this weekend. As you guys may be aware, the city of Moorhead, I think, is going to be receiving about $4 to $6 million, depending on how that shakes out, and in Clay County with another $13 million just from that package. We've got the traditional appropriations process that is well underway right now. This is where the 12 different appropriations committees do their annual appropriating process. The different thing that's new and a little bit more exciting is that earmarks are back in both the House and the Senate. They've been on about a 10-year hiatus. The process will be different, and the rules are still forthcoming. So you've got the appropriations process that's beginning, and you've got the 12 different cardinals of Congress, Congresswoman McCollum being the most notable in the Minnesota delegation, that holds those key chairs. So you've got that piece coming down the pike. The next thing that you'll start to hear about, I think, once Congress really kind of gets past this COVID package, is what everybody's been talking about for about a decade, which is an infrastructure bill. We are cautiously optimistic from conversations we've been having with staff at all different levels and the administration, as well as one-on-one meetings with members, that an infrastructure bill is very likely to move. It will likely be wrapped in a wider blanket of COVID, long-term COVID economic relief. So they'll be looking to target shovel-ready projects that certainly fit into the vocabulary of the priorities of the new administration and Democratic majorities in Congress. Climate change, social equity issues, things that I think the city of Moorhead has some exciting ways to enhance and accentuate some of those messaging points. And that process, we're talking about probably a $2 trillion floor is what the Democrats are talking about right now. We think that, this will be the first real attempt, I think, that'll be made to legitimately try and get a bipartisan deal out of Congress through this infrastructure package. If they can't, I think the members of Congress have some options on the table, be it a second bite at the apple for budget reconciliation in the latter part of the year, or possibly pressing the button and doing away with the filibuster are both options that are being heavily discussed out in Congress right now. So maybe with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague that many of you are familiar with, Emily Tranter, who has been a wonderful part of the Washington, D.C. government relations family, has been out in D.C. area for over 14 years, has worked in different members' office, and we're very proud to have her and excited to have her lay out some additional opportunities and details.
Thanks, Ryan. Thank you, everybody, for your time tonight. And I just want to thank Lisa and Bob. As Lisa said, we have had the opportunity to work with your staff and colleagues in previous years, and it's just been a pleasure and really positive and productive federal advocacy strategies that really lay the groundwork and the baseline for success and long-term success. So as Ryan said, we're looking right now at 3 major opportunities. One is the COVID package that we expect very likely to pass the next day or so and the president to sign. And that is money that you all will see. It will be very flexible. It will be used for lost revenue, and it will help the city with budget shortfalls from COVID impacts. And a lot of those rules will be determined by the Treasury in terms of where that money can go, and it's very interesting and can be sometimes complex to sort of check all those boxes and make sure that every opportunity is being taken advantage of. The second is earmarks, and those projects are a little broader, or a lot broader actually, than just transportation and just the underpass project, overpass project, the Central Avenue, all of the projects that you have in Moorhead. It could be human services, it could be HUD, it could be criminal justice, anything that these 12 bills appropriate that the city needs federal funding for. We can look at projects and see if they fit. And that request process will go through the House and the Senate. And as Ryan said, those are both being determined. The rules are being determined right now, but it likely will happen fairly quickly, next couple weeks to months, and wanting to make sure that the city takes advantage of that, I think is how our team has been thinking about it, is, being prepared and being ready, because all these opportunities will happen in quick succession. And if you're ready for it, there's really an opportunity that we haven't seen in years to put projects forward. The third, the infrastructure project program, programmatic bill, which will have projects out of it as well. Those will be larger, and those are transportation focused. And for the build grant process, there's two ways to look at this. One is that you could ask for the project as an earmark, and we're not sure if those will be $25 million earmarks, but they certainly could be a lot larger than typical earmarks, which are in the 1 to 2 million on transportation and a couple $100,000 to $1 million in non-transportation, depending. But not only will that bill be earmarked out of and project specific, but there will also be likely giving a huge rush of funding to programs like Build. And so while the city's project has been extremely competitive in the past, as Bob and Lisa had laid out during the feedback we got from DOT and our members being supportive across the board from our delegation, when there is more money than $1 billion to go around to the $900 billion of projects they're requesting, that is a good thing for the build process too. So while that process is important and it is vital, and I think very key to continue, and the city has put an incredible amount of work and really strategic thought behind that build process. You could be looking at tandem processes to request money. And I like to look at it as, we have multiple hills to climb right now. And, we want to make sure to just be making you aware that of all of these opportunities and positions. And one of the things that I'm doing right now, just for my own, to keep all this straight, is building a matrix out of all these opportunities, because they are ever developing and rapidly developing. And I think that it is just a really interesting time to have the city's focus and name be in as many places and opportunity funding streams as possible. So I'll pause there if there are questions, and appreciate again your time. It's just been such a pleasure to get to know the city of Moorhead through your priority federal projects, and I just really appreciate being here tonight.
Yeah, and if I might just close with one final comment to Emily. Listen, we'd be honored to partner with the city in any capacity. If that's only on the build process, again, we are all hands on deck. But the one thing that we might counsel you for the city's best interest, I think, and you are very lucky to have some really great and on top of it staff. Being this far ahead of the process before build comes out is not a small deal. But really is preparedness and prioritization. It's if the city can do its homework and get the projects and programs that might have an opportunity for federal funding and kind of prioritized, I think that the value that we can really add is helping put them in the different paths or path that could best suit for it, and really try to, while we're in this unique time, try to get as many resources for the city of Moorhead as possible. And I think with the well-coordinated effort with your staff. We're cautiously optimistic that there's many paths to pursue to do that. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly and Ms. Tranter. Ms. Bodie, did you have any additional comments to make?
I think it's really that we'll stand for questions at this point unless Bob has more to add. I think that kind of concludes all of the decision-making points that we wanted to talk to you about tonight. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I do have several council members who have their hands raised. We are going to go Councilmember Dahlquist, Lindas, and then White.
Thank you, Mayor and Mr. Kelly and Ms. Tranter. How likely is it to have another client that would be in competition with us and that you would be helping both of us? And do you ever run into that where you have more than one client that's applying for the same money, same grant, and all that kind of thing?
Are we able to unmute ourselves?
Go ahead.
I'm unmuted. Ryan, do you want to address this or do you want me to respond?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about federal funding and the really great opportunities is that, well, first of all, if we do have conflicts that are true conflicts, we would notice clients. And I think that there are, because the earmarking process and because the bill grant process and earmarking in the transportation bill will be member specific and member focused. You'll really be we will be working within not just the global Congress, you'll be working with specific members. And so with that is helps with making sure that we can be clear about your priorities. But I also think that, members of Congress, we position you, we see our role as positioning you the best you can be, because members of Congress need that information. They need that background in order to support the project. And that's a really big piece of it. And so when we're doing that with your specific members of Congress, we can do that. If we have other clients that are looking at the same global process, they will be looking at it with other members of Congress or with other criteria or specifics. So it's not a direct competition in that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and even through, I might just add to the councilwoman's very fair and good question. In the earmarking process, as it's been laid out so far, and the rules are light in coming out, but each member of Congress has the ability to put in for 10 projects that they would recommend for earmarks. So in this case, Congresswoman Michelle Fischbach would be your representative and somebody that we'd want to be sitting down with and continuing those conversations. They can put in for 10. Not all Congress people are created equal under the system out there at the moment, as some of you are aware. So there's, usually everybody gets a little bit of something and some get a little bit more than others. Then obviously there will be an earmarking process, which is less defined at the moment in the Senate, where obviously Senator Smith and Senator Klobuchar will be taking a look at priorities for the entire state. And we would be looking, as continuing to do, is continuing to build their awareness on current projects and any additional ones that you guys think might qualify to do for one of the pathways.
Thank you. That answer your question, Councilmember Dahlquist?
Kind of.
All right.
I just want us to be, stand out. But I understand there's going to be more than one client applying for the same things that we're going to be applying for. So, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Lindas and then Councilmember White.
Thank you, Mayor Carlson, and thank you, Lisa Bodie and Dr. Zimmerman for the work on this. I guess I'm strongly in favor of the kind of year contract And you sort of already answered some of these questions about the different opportunities besides, or I should say in addition to the build grant. I like the term congressionally directed spending better because it's a little more clear what it is, although the common lexicon being what it is, earmarks. But what I'm really excited about is the 4-year stimulus infrastructure bill. From some of my conversations with other federal office staff, it sounds like there's going to be great opportunity. And from what you just kind of said or alluded to, Ryan, I think that there's going to be an opportunity for other potential infrastructure grants that the Moorhead could actually put in for and get funded. And so, and there's a few of those having to do with electrification and infrastructure, things that could help us actually address and be proactive and be more resilient in the face of climate issues. Like, we had rolling planned power outages, which is the better way of saying planned power outage again, which we would like to avoid, and being more regionally robust and resilient. So I think, so I'm understanding that correct, that would be the opportunity to work and be able to basically be aware of the different opportunities that are going to come up pretty quickly, as I understand it.
Yes, absolutely. Transmission, is going to be a big focus. Obviously, when things in Texas are starting to affect the Midwest regions that are a little bit better with the cold weather, but absolutely transmission, I think, will be a big focus of the infrastructure package. And to your point, Councilman, the earmark, the appropriation congressional directed spending project has already begun. So, I mean, members of Congress are already requesting and reaching out to us, frankly, too, saying, hey, what do you have in the hopper? What do you have that might be shovel ready? What's the opportunity to get some seed money on some of these programs? As you guys know, a lot of times with the federal government and some of these larger projects, it takes patience and continuing to get it line and taking some of these down phases at a time. And so it's another great opportunity to get some seed funding or some gap funding to the next bridge of funding that you might need.
Yeah, and I would also just add that, as the infrastructure bill is created, we've heard staff and members talk about it as ARA on steroids. ARA was the 2009 stimulus bill, and this is going to be a much bigger bill. There will be an opportunity for input from the city to the members about what should be included and what funding mechanisms and programs would be helpful to cities like Moorhead. So that is another consideration too, is having that engagement and that conversation that's larger than just a project base. You have some, they want to hear from you on this and moving forward.
Thank you.
Councilmember White.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I just wanted to say I do support the service agreement, and I think that we should do the 12-month expanded federal legislative agenda. I think it's money well spent, and I would just suggest if we do that, that we also look at what else we can do to really make sure we have all hands on deck to be the most effective at all as we can be in that advocacy. And I know when we've talked about this before, just looking at how we might even work with some of our stakeholders in the community, some of our other partners, our business community that might be able to advocate on our behalf, but even looking on the North Dakota side of the river, because this is a major transit route. So if we're looking at, business, people trying to transport things in and out of North Dakota, a lot of them are going to use that underpass. And so, so I think it is money well spent and we should do it. And then I wanted to just, since you gave us sort of the everything in the kitchen sink presentation tonight, I wanted to loop back to the property acquisition. When I looked through the properties that it seems they would need to be acquired, it looks like, I don't think there's any residential properties, and it's all commercial and it's almost exclusively local small businesses. And so I just wanted to, this is maybe more for our city manager. I was hoping Mr. LaPointe would still be with us too, but in addition to having SRF take on the lead for acquisition, I just wanted to know what else can we be doing to make sure that we're communicating well with our local business community, that, there's some some of those businesses there, I think about like Fargo Rubber Stamp. I got to go to their ribbon cutting a few years ago, and that was a company that had been in Fargo for 100 years, and we, worked with them, and they moved to Moorhead. And so I would hate to lose some of those great locally owned small businesses. And so I just want to make sure that we're doing everything we can. In addition to having SRF work on acquisitions, what can we do to make sure that we have good communication with our business community, that we are working with them closely to make that transition go well and keep those businesses here in Moorhead.
Thank you. I'm going to let Dr. Zimmerman respond.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mayor. That's a great question, Councilmember White. And Derek is a part of our staff team that's working on this, and so he's been in discussions on how this process is going to proceed. One of the first things we'll do after we get all the documents in place is we'll have a kickoff meeting with SRF. Derek will be a part of that conversation so that we make sure that SRF is aware of what we can do and when we should be brought into those conversations. So we'll work as closely as we possibly can with each and every one of those owners and tenants to provide them with whatever assistance we can provide.
And if I could add, primary to our economic development strategy, and this is in our strategic plan, is to retain the businesses that we do have. So, whether we talk about relocation or what that looks like, that relationship is of key importance. And that's not just for the businesses, that also includes when we do the river buyouts, we try to, ensure and try and find places for people to stay and live in Moorhead.
Thank you. Did you have any additional words to add, City Manager?
Well, I think we've done a lot of talking on the subject already, and I've got an update a little later. But I've got to say that I think this is clearly staying ahead. And, the fact that we've got a 5-year capital improvement plan, the fact that we have been planning has been setting us up for just this, the fact that whether there's state delegation representatives and federal that reach out to us, the relationships that we've been developing over the last 20, 30 years with a successful strategy is just of key importance. And what I really mean to say here is these things have not happened in hallways in St. Paul and in Washington, D.C. This has happened because people in this community have shown up at picnics, at parties, stopped and visited with people throughout the years and formed relationships that really do count. And so what's happening here is what happens when you stay ahead. So looking forward, appreciate the support.
Well said, City Manager Molly. Appreciate it. I don't see any other hands up for any questions. So I would entertain a motion for 13A through E. Well, actually 13A through F, and then if the motion could specify option 1 or 2, either the 6 months or the year.
Deb White, I move to approve with option 2, the 12-month contract.
Steve Lindahl seconds.
And just to clarify, that is number 13A through F. Councilmember White?
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
I see a head nod from Councilmember Linda. So any further discussion? See none. Madam Clerk, could I get a roll call, please?
Dahlquist?
Yes.
Gilbertson?
Aye.
Caroon?
Yes.
White?
Yes.
Selgevold?
Aye.
Hendrickson?
Aye.
Lindas?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes. All right, jumping to number 21 on our agenda. First, before we go, I just did want to thank Ms. Stratner and Mr. Kelly for coming and joining us today and giving us that information. It's very appreciative, and thank you, Dr. Zimmerman and Ms. Bodie.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So moving on to number 21 on the agenda, resolution to appoint the appointment of Public Works Director. And I'm going to turn it over to City Manager Molly.
Thank you, Mayor. And just a second thank you for the support on that last item. That is a really big deal. Not just the work related to what's happening in the federal government, but on the 11th Street project and being able to move forward. This is going to help with getting calls and being able to talk with the folks in the neighborhood. So, you know, I'm going to introduce Steve here in just a minute, but first I want to just send a special thank you to our operations manager, Randy Offeld, who did such a great job as an interim public works director in the large wake that was left by Steve Moore right before the snow and ice season began in November. Randy's leadership was just stellar, and it's just a massive asset to Moorhead. We're grateful for him and his leadership, and it's with great excitement and enthusiasm that we welcome Steve Iverson back to the City of Moorhead team. Steve and his wife Brenda and two boys are longtime residents of Moorhead. Steve in particular has a great reputation in our community, working with the public and private sector as a former business owner himself, great acumen in business and care and concern for others. And so, Steve, welcome home, and our future is bright with you at the helm at Public Works, and I submit a recommendation to appoint Steve Iverson as Public Works Director in Moorhead.
Thank you, Mr. Molly. Mr. Iverson, do you want to say a few words?
Sure, as long as I have the microphone, I might as well. Madam Mayor and Council, as Dan said, my name's Steve Iverson, 113 38th Avenue Circle South, Moorhead, Minnesota. Like Dan so wonderfully summarized, lifelong adult resident of South Moorhead, former city employee back in the 90s. So I don't know if I'm more humbled, honored, happy, all of the above to potentially come back and bookend the career where it all started. Pretty cool place to be. Really big deal to me. Excited to be here. Dan already called out Randy, my right-hand guy. Hats off to him for keeping the wheels on the wagon the last 3 months. Also publicly acknowledge Mr. Moore. He and I are going to be huddling up on his own time to kind of pass the baton as it is or were. Really neat that he was part of the interview committee and engaged, and it means something to him what he left behind, and I intend to pick it up and carry it on best I can. I'd be remiss without thanking my lovely wife Brenda that Dan mentioned, and my family for putting me where I ended up here. I guess I'll answer any questions. I will say that I know my first order of business is probably to clean up and, no pun intended, kind of clarify cleanup week. We have a plan that I probably can't really share quite yet, but protecting our workers, safety is first and foremost. It'll work out just fine. So I'll entertain any questions if appropriate, and happy to be here.
Well, we are very excited to have you, and yes, a great shout out to Randy for kind of holding down the fort while Mr. Moore was gone and before we had you come on board. This is just a very exciting time to have you become part of this great team over here in Moorhead. So welcome home.
Good to be back.
Appreciate that.
The future
and
is bright, as the boss says.
That's right. It is very bright. And like Mr. Bachman said, we're very creative over here because we do really unique things because we want to take care of our workers and we want to give our citizens a great place to live, work, and play. So I know that there will be a lot of people that will be anxiously waiting to hear on your proposal for Cleanup Week as your first big endeavor as a new Public Works Director. But without further ado, though, I think we need to first pass a resolution to approve you. So if I could please have a motion.
Steve Lindos moves to approve the appointment of another Steve as Public Works Director.
And I think Councilmember Seldeveld seconded. So I don't think any discussion. Too bad it's COVID because we could have a little party here for you. But Madam Clerk, could I get a roll call, please?
Dahlquist? Yes. Gilbertson?
Aye.
Caroon?
Yes.
White?
Yes.
Seldgevold?
Aye.
Hendrickson?
Yes.
Lindos?
Yes.
And the motion passes. Welcome home and congratulations.
Thank you. Look forward to working with all of you.
Absolutely. We do too. And thank you, Mr. Everson, for waiting. Let's see here. 2.5 hours to officially be welcome into our family. So I appreciate that. Moving on to number 22, the legislative update, and I will turn it over to Ms. Bodie.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Given the lateness of the hour, I won't go into great depth. You do have a legislative dashboard that we prepare that kind of lists all of the activities that we do to work with the state government on legislative priorities of the city of Moorhead. There are 4 primary objectives that we have, and I'll just briefly mention them. And then on the last one, there are some action items that I'd like your direction on. And so the 4 primary objectives, initiatives of the city of Moorhead. The first is our bonding initiative, which is supporting the DNR's efforts to secure additional funding to continue flood mitigation and acquisition of flood-prone properties to address the North Moorhead Flood Control Project and gaps in citywide protection. And the city engineer's office has estimated that we need another $17.5 million to accomplish that. And we have put in a bill specific to Moorhead's request. We have not received a hearing on that issue yet, but we are sharing the message and communicating that in the audiences that count on that activity, the committees. On our policy initiatives, we have 3. The first one is fortunately in good condition. It's Preserve and Protect the Border City Enterprise Zone Program and Disparity Reduction Credit Programs as contained within the state budget. And they are in the state budget, and we're very fortunate that the state of Minnesota's budget deficit projections that were really kind of ominous last summer and even into the fall have now resulted in part due to federal stimulus resources that there is a projected surplus at this time. And so that helps us feel more confident about protecting those programs that we have that are so vital to our business community related to border cities. The other 2 initiatives, one is continue efforts to secure local discretion and flexibility for border cities concerning the building code and related construction regulations. And we've worked to narrow down that request to requesting a frost footing depth equal to our border, adjacent border cities in neighboring states and not less than Zone 2 of the Minnesota Code. So by going from a 60-inch frost footing depth in Minnesota, in our region, to a 54-inch footing depth that is the standard in North Dakota, has no quality difference and saves $3,000 in construction cost for every home with a full basement. And so we do have a hearing on that issue on Wednesday morning in the Senate with Senator Eakin, and we'll have our building official and a representative of the Home Builders Association of Fargo-Moorhead, Mr. Don Dabbert, who owns Dabbert Custom Homes, testifying on that issue in the Senate on Wednesday morning. So we're encouraged by that. And the last issue is the one which we need some action or consideration from the City Council, and that is securing the legislative authority to place a local option sales tax question on a general election ballot in 2022. You passed a resolution on this issue in early January of this year, and that started the ball rolling with consideration by the state legislature and the tax committee. And since that time, we have consulted with Roars Construction and with our bond counsel at financial counsel at Baker Tilly. And we have found that because if this is on a ballot in 2022 and construction doesn't start until at least spring of 2023, that there are a number of unknown factors in the the timing of that project as far as construction costs as well as financing costs. And so we have we've obtained a per square foot cost for what we estimate the public library community center project, which we'd like the community's consideration on, and determined that a 15% increase would give us some cushion in our budget to make sure that when we do build this project, that we build it to last and that we build it with the community's needs in mind. And we've also talked with Baker Tilly about not knowing what will happen with interest rates in the public financing realm, and also at City Attorney Shockley's advice, building in a reserve account for principal and interest on the bonds, that we would like to ask the council's consideration of whether they would like to change our request from $25.3 million for this project to 29.1. So it would be a 15% increase in construction costs and associated financing costs. The estimated repayment term would extend from what we had previously estimated at about a 13-year term to 22 years. Now that's more than a 15% increase for a 15% increase in cost, but it also takes into those other security and safety measures that protect us should we wish to move forward with this. The reason for the timing on this request is because there is a hearing on this matter on Thursday, and to put in an author's amendment now before the hearings start and be able to let legislators ask questions about this, the timing is probably best done now before those hearings start, and it would hopefully prevent us from having to go back to through this process again next year to ask for what is relatively, I don't want to say minor, but not a huge increase in price next year, because we are dependent on whether the legislature passes a tax bill, and this is their traditional year to pass a tax bill. So I can stand for questions. Just wanted to again, bring that forward, and I did have a meeting with Representative Keeler this morning, and she is aware of this and that the council will be acting tonight, and she asked me to let her know after the meeting. So she's prepared to get this through the process should the council wish to pursue this additional change.
Thank you, Ms. Bodie. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, do I have a resolution?
So moved, Deb White.
Steve Lindahl, seconds.
Okay, White, Lindahl. Any further discussion or comments? Okay, Madam Clerk, could I get a roll call?
Dahlquist?
Yes.
Gilbertson?
Aye.
White?
Yes.
Caroon?
Yes.
Seljevold?
Aye.
Hendrickson?
Aye.
Lindahl?
Yes.
Your motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank Representative Keeler for working so diligently on our behalf. Moving on to the agenda with mayor and council reports. Any council members who wish to make a report? Okay, Councilmember White.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to just briefly report on a meeting I attended today for the West Central Initiative Economic Development Division. And during the meeting, we had a presentation on some data they've gathered through a survey of childcare centers in our region. And these would be what are called Rule 3 childcare centers, so not in-home and not in when you have family or friends that provide childcare. Just in West Central Minnesota. And I thought it was rather appropriate given that it's International Women's Day, because we know that we have a childcare shortage within our region and that women are disproportionately impacted by that. It disproportionately impacts their employment. They are the ones that are disproportionately employed in childcare centers. So I just wanted to briefly share a little bit of information that they gathered regarding these centers in our region and the people that they serve. So for instance, they found that the average cost per child at these centers is $10,000 a year, which is a little pretty astounding when you consider that a quarter of families in our region have incomes that are $35,000 or less. For the salary that the teachers make, this is one of the pieces of information that I found particularly startling. So the average pay for an early ed teacher working full-time is $14.44 per hour. In comparison, an average kindergarten teacher with the same level of education gets $25 an hour. And the starting pay for people with at an entry-level position at Target and McDonald's is $13 an hour. So only less than $2 difference from what a college-educated teacher at one of these facilities receives. And so I just wanted to point that out. And again, just to think about as we're looking at the impact that it has on our community, the impact it has on women and their employment, that these are things that we should look at how we can further invest in this and try to address the child care shortage that we have in our region. And of course, one of the ways that we can do it is through advocacy, that a lot of this is really tied to federal and state investment in P-12 education. But also even we talked about some of the things that we can do at the local level. And so some of the things, even things like private-public partnerships, and that's where the community center that we've been talking about is a great opportunity for us to look at how we can provide affordable, quality childcare in our region. But even other things, and I'm not necessarily recommending these, but just to say that we should discuss things like other communities are providing tax abatement for childcare. In some cases, they're using sales tax to help make childcare more affordable, but just looking for ways that we can really try to address this shortage within our community and provide greater investment in our children. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember White. Councilmember Karoun.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to share an update on the library needs assessment. I haven't met with the commission yet, but I have a little bit of information. So the Moorhead Public Library did a community survey that was shared and actually recently closed on March 5th. And they have collected 852 responses from our community so far, which I think is pretty great. They're also conducting focus groups with residents, and we should have some more feedback from them soon. So I'm really interested to see what they come back with, but excited to hear that they had such great response. Thank you.
Yeah, that is an incredible response. So thank you, Councilmember Karoun. Anyone else? I am not seeing anybody else's hands up. So just a really quick mayor report, because I know it is getting late tonight, late in the evening, and we also have an executive session to go to. Just a quick update, just reminding everyone that on March 11th from 6 to 7 p.m., I'm going to be having a coffee with the mayor. This is specifically geared towards the seniors in our community, and if they want to go to cityofmoorhead.com to register for that event, I look forward to meeting with the seniors in our community. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was that Commissioner Bischoff from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency invited myself and the mayor from Fergus Falls to participate in a press conference in regards to a $2.9 million grant proposal that Governor Walz is proposing around resiliency and water in the state of Minnesota. So those are two things that I wanted to bring up. And now I'm going to turn it over to City Manager Molly for his report.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be brief. Boy, we've gotten a lot done tonight, so thank you all. Just COVID-related stuff real quickly. Met with Clay County Public Health today, and 16.1% of the county has received at least one dose of the vaccine. That's close to the state of Minnesota, which is at about 17.5%. Healthcare, long-term care personnel, folks working in shelters, public safety folks have gotten it as well. It sounds like the governor is looking for 75% of folks over 65 to be vaccinated before moving to the next phase of 1B. So I understand we're getting close there. And that next population will be a lot of the vulnerable populations with rare conditions, people with disabilities and the like. So, we talked a couple weeks ago about the vaccine connector. It's really interesting. It sounds like it is working. I've spoken with two people that say that after this meeting 2 weeks ago had reached out, and these two had parents who were in need, and both sets of mothers and fathers have gotten that first dose. So, encouraging folks to check out that vaccine connector, which is cityofmoorhead.com. There's a link there to the state site. And then one thing that I learned about earlier today too is that Minnesota residents are now getting vaccinated in North Dakota to a great extent. I understand that things there are opening up more. If primary care or your employment is in North Dakota, that sort of thing. They're moving into the 1C category. So I encourage folks to check with their pharmacies or ask or reach out. That may be possible there. And then just in closing it up, I wanted to just mention we're thinking at these meetings in accordance with the state of Minnesota's stay safe guidance pertaining to COVID-19. We would like to, the rule is that I think it's 25% of capacity is permitted in facilities. And so we'd like to pursue some of that to allow for some flexibility here. This could include the media, members of the public needing an accommodation, staff, and the like, of about 12 folks, in these rooms. We tested it out with the community meeting with vector control last week. That worked really fairly well by way of seating that was socially distanced. Masks are also required. And so, we've been consistent with the Minnesota stay safe guidance up throughout the process, and we intend to take that step and wanted to inform you of that. So.
Wonderful. This is good news. Keep hoping for the day that all this COVID stuff is done, and I think we're finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. We do need to go into executive session tonight. Could I get a motion to go into executive session?
So moved.
Second, Karun.
And could I get a roll call vote, please?
Dahlquist?
Yes.
Gilbertson?
Aye.
Karun?
Yes.
White?
Yes.
Seldvold?
Aye.
Hendrickson?
Aye.
Lindos?
Yes.
Okay, we will be going to an executive session. Okay, I think everyone is back in. So we are returning from executive session. Is there any new business? Seeing none, do we have any other citizens that wish to address the council? Seeing none, do I have a motion to adjourn? Or end the meeting?
So moved.
Do I have a second? Do I have a second?
Linda
Saldival.
seconds if needed.
Okay. All right. Thank you all. Good night, Moorhead.